Thank you so much for tuning in today. We are in Donahue Park in downtown Pawcatuck along the beautiful, wild, and scenic Pawcatuck River. It received this designation just a little over a year ago. And a fun fact that I just learned was this is actually the longest river system in New England. I think it's about 110 miles, and it borders 2 states. We can almost touch Rhode Island over there. And then we're here very graciously. They've given their time, both Maggie Jones and Tom Sanford, to tell us a little bit about an exciting kayak trip that they just took down the river that I think took maybe a year's worth of planning. And they're going to tell us about it in case some of you guys at home want to try to also kayak down the beautiful, wild, and scenic Pawcatuck River. So maybe, Tom, do you want to tell us a little bit about your trip, and then Maggie can add in also?
Sure. Yes, I wanted to paddle down the Pawcatuck River for many, many years. I've had a love affair with the river since about 1950 when I first crossed the Pawcatuck River going from Connecticut into Rhode Island. But I particularly became interested in paddling down the entire river when, as Danielle mentioned, in early 2019, the Pawcatuck River, the Wood River, received the designation as a wild and scenic river. That really got me going. So I spent about 3 or 4 months planning the kayak trip. I sent email messages to Steve Fagan at the New London Day and to other people to organize this, and Steve mentioned that he would like to join the paddle if I really did get it organized, and he would invite Maggie Jones along, and that was wonderful to have Maggie join the trip because she's one heck of a naturalist. She can speak on all subjects going along the river, so I think it's time that I turn it over to Maggie and mention a little bit about the different legs of the journey and what we saw.
So I have also just loved the Pawcatuck River and enjoyed paddling and swimming and hiking and running around it since probably the early 70s. We used to do a lot of family trips. We would go wild grape picking by canoe on the Pawcatuck River, starting at Borden's Pond and doing different segments. So I had done lots of different segments through the years on sections of the Wood River and the Pawcatuck River, but never linked it all together. So this really piqued my interest. And what better thing to be able to do during a pandemic? You can spend time outside. It's okay. In individual kayaks, we're well spaced apart. I mean, 6 feet plus in many areas. And it was just a wonderful adventure, beginning really from start to finish, but beginning with Borden Pond. It took us some time to actually find the entryway into the Pawcatuck River. Borden Pond is a large pond. I think it's the largest pond in New England. And that in and of itself was an adventure. And I remember that from how many years ago? 50 years ago, as also being a challenge then. And I was so impressed how little it has really changed since my earliest recollections of it. It is truly wild and scenic, especially in the upper reaches. You're in a completely different world, and wonderful native vegetation on both sides. It's beautiful at all times of year. We really were fortunate, given this drought that we're in, to have enough water in those upper regions to be able to continue on. We had a couple of spots where we had to pull our boats out and climb over trees, but that's you just have to be prepared for that.
And then,
Speaking of when we paddled down, our first leg of the journey was in late June. For people that would like to do the same paddle next year, if you can, I would recommend starting perhaps in late May, when the water is a little bit higher. We ended up in August, our final leg of the paddle, but maybe ending up in July would be better than ending up in August, because again, the water level will be generally higher.
And it doesn't have to take as long as we took. I mean, we really spread it out and took a week in between, sometimes 2 weeks. Each leg, we would spend, it was very relaxed, 4 to 6 hours. We could have done it more quickly, but we didn't. We stopped for lunch. Sometimes we just floated along. We stopped and looked at things. We walked out from time to time. So we really had a very leisurely, enjoyable
conditions, but I think 4 days of paddling, not 4 consecutive days, but 4 days split up, is the right number of days to paddle down the entire Pawcatuck River.
And I would say that there are different sections that would appeal to different skill levels. And so there are sections along the lower part of the river. You can launch at Barn Island. You can launch right here in downtown Pawcatuck Westerly, right 20 yards from where we're standing. You can tie up a boat right here by the Bridge Restaurant and go in for a little lunch. It's just the lower part of the river is very accessible, and there's also a launch just a little bit further downriver on the westerly side, and there are other marinas and things along the lower part of the river. But it's much more built up here. It's still wild and scenic, especially around Barn Island. I mean, what a gem of a place that is. And you know, the conservation piece, we have to keep that in mind going forward. We don't want to overdevelop the mouth of the Pawcatuck River. But as you journey, and I would recommend the journey start north and paddle to the sea, so to speak, because much of it you wouldn't want to try to paddle upstream. But our first leg went from Warden's Pond to Lower Shannock. And there are a couple of waterfalls there, so you have to do your planning. Thankfully, you know, you wouldn't want to go over Horseshoe Falls in a boat, and thankfully Tom really did his due diligence, and so we knew what to expect and where to expect it, where we could get out. And there are publications, as Tom mentioned, the Wood Pawcatuck Watershed Association is a wonderful resource, and they have lots of information. There are maps of the Pawcatuck River. It's not hard to figure it out.
And then maybe just to also touch on, as we chatted just before this, a little about the history of the river. You guys had such insightful knowledge.
It's such an important historical and cultural and natural resource for both Connecticut and Rhode Island and all of New England.
I think rivers are important of the history of the United States.
Yes.
And before. All rivers. Rivers are fascinating. That's why we love to paddle down rivers. I just think about the Great Swamp, which is kind of the headwaters of the Pawcatuck River. You know, you paddle out of Warden Pond into the river, but actually you're snaking through the Great Swamp. Well, the Great Swamp was where the Narragansett tribe had a large settlement back in the 1600s and 1500s. Unfortunately, that settlement, the people there were massacred in 1675 during the King Philip Wars. So, you know, history is wonderful. There's history down the river a little ways where you pass the Davis farm, Whit Davis's farm, where there's land in there that there's all kinds of Indian treasures and so forth.
That abuts Barn Island, and that farm had been in his family for some 14 generations.
And think of all the mills that we passed, you know, the old factories.
And there were lots of wonderful ruins and old stone bridges, and so it is a paddle through time, so to speak. And you, when we came along Boom Bridge, you could see the Beriah Lewis farm up on the ridge, and the cows, you know, wallowing in the river. The bridge is yet to be complete, but that's a really nice section of as part of our last leg.
Well, thank you guys so much. So we'll try and share some of the resources you guys mentioned, and hope we can do it again next year.
Did we answer all your questions?
Yeah, and hopefully there'll be some more follow-up. So if you
There's
don't
a
mind,
lot to talk about, and it really is, especially the upper reaches are very clean. And so that was one of the things that really surprised me was how few people we saw. We saw loads of birds and wildflowers, and it was very quiet, and you felt like you could be on the Amazon. You could have been in an entirely different part of the world, and to think that it's such a densely populated area as Rhode Island and Connecticut border. But we saw very few people along the way, but it was delightful when we would see family groups swimming in the water and distancing. Of course, they're just small groups of people, but we only saw that a couple of times.
Not necessarily for publication, but this is a funny story. On our first day paddling through the Great Swamp, I lost my iPhone. And that was a tragedy, of course. So
it was
I
brand
went off
new.
and bought a new iPhone, and then about 3 weeks later, Chris Fox, the executive director of the Wood River Pawcatuck Watershed Association, he called me up and said, "Tom, I found a cell phone in a waterproof case on the Pawcatuck River. Might it be yours?" And I said it was, and it still worked. And I'm using it to this day. I gave my son the new phone that I bought, took my old one, and then on the next trip, he lost the new phone. So we lost and recovered several iPhones on the journey, which really was comical.
And one of the other things that we might mention is, the restoration of the river has involved some dam removal, and so unfortunately some of the dams aren't quite as kayak and canoe friendly as they might be, but there are several of them are doable. And so that's where water level and some prior knowledge and depending on how.
Yeah. So there are dams. There are these fish weirs or these fish ladders that you might have to portage around. So there are some obstacles on the river. It's not a cakewalk. It takes some level of expertise in paddling and the right type of equipment. I think it's better to have the smaller kayaks that are good in the rivers and streams rather than the long sea kayak for
For
this
sure.
journey.
And some of the sections, the river is so narrow, you could touch both sides with your paddle. And so a smaller boat, especially in the upper parts, is better. And you don't want an eggshell, little Kevlar boat. You want something that's going to be able to withstand some rocks, some bumps.
And is there, can people, if they want to do just one segment of the river, can they do it any time of year within reason? Like, could they do it now? Or?
Yes.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And that's what I would
Fall?
recommend. The fall is lovely. I mean, as I started, we used to go grape picking every September, early September, and my kids and nieces and nephews can't wait to do it this year. So
Probably from this moment to well into the September, October, may be the worst time to paddle because the river is
If
going
it's
to be
low.
And remember all of the weeds and freshwater eelgrass.
that was much further down.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it depends on rainfall and things like that. So and you could get in trouble if you went after a long period of heavy rain. It would really be rushing, and so you want to be mindful of that.
This leg can be done any time of year,
Yeah.
without a doubt. And I would say almost from Potter Hill down, although the weeds we encountered were south of Potter Hill.
There were some real shallow sections as you came through White Rock.
So right now, the place to kayak would be to come out of Donahue Park, put in right here, and kayak down to Barn Island.
Just watch out for motorboats and jet skis.
And then kayaking in January and February and March might be dangerous because the water level will be so high that the river will be rushing, and that could be dangerous. But I would say from about the end of April or May until, that's a good starting point.
Good. Well, thank you guys so much
You're welcome.
for meeting us.